When realtor Daniel Morrow first stepped inside the mansion on Beverly Grove Drive, he expected the same chill every unoccupied house in Beverly Hills carried, that sterile silence of marble floors and empty rooms. But this one was different. The cold here felt personal. As he walked through the foyer, he said later, it was as if the air itself watched him. The heavy drapes hadn't been drawn in years, and the late afternoon sun only deepened the gloom, turning the chrome fixtures and pale gray furniture into dull mirrors of themselves. Hudson's old house had stood empty for decades, a quiet relic of Hollywood's golden facade, all symmetry and restraint, as if emotion had no place there. The architecture was sharp, almost masculine, but something in it resisted warmth. Neighbors still called it the Fortress, a name Hudson himself reportedly used during his final years. He bought the house in the early 1960s, just as his career was peaking. It was meant to be a sanctuary, but stories circulated that he never truly felt at ease there. Staff spoke about doors locking themselves, phones ringing with silence on the other end, and a faint smell of tobacco in rooms that hadn't been used in years. The new owners, Ethan and Claire Donahue, moved in after a long renovation. Claire, an interior designer, was drawn to the structure's clean lines, its perfect geometry, a modernist temple, she called it. But Ethan noticed early something uncanny about the house's acoustics. Every sound, footsteps, laughter, even conversation, seemed to echo a second longer than it should. It was subtle but unnerving. You'd say something, and a breath later, you'd hear it answer itself faintly from another room. The first week, they thought it was just the architecture. But then came the power surges, small flickers at first. Lights dimming for no reason. A security camera in the living room that rebooted every night at 2:47 a.m. No footage saved afterward. The electrician blamed old wiring, though everything had been replaced. Neighbors, when asked, spoke in careful tones. One of them, an elderly woman named Lorraine who had lived across the street since the 70s, said she used to see a figure on the balcony long after Hudson had been hospitalized. Tall man, always in a suit, she told them. Didn't move much. Just stood there, like he was waiting for a cue. Ethan laughed it off until he found that same balcony door unlocked 3 mornings in a row despite the alarm system showing no breach. The strangest incident happened one humid August evening. Claire was cataloging fabric samples in the den when she heard faint music, an old jazz standard. Maybe Ella Fitzgerald, playing somewhere distant. She assumed Ethan had turned on Spotify upstairs, but when she checked, the sound came from the built-in intercom system, which they'd never used. When Ethan disconnected the power to the panel, the music didn't stop. It just faded, as if someone had simply walked away holding the speaker. Days later, they found out the house had a hidden listening room, a narrow chamber sealed behind the library wall, discovered during a routine inspection. Inside, mid-century recording equipment, a reel-to-reel tape deck still plugged into an old junction line. Dust lay thick on everything, except one thing, the record button. It gleamed faintly, as if it had been pressed recently. That was the moment Ethan admitted the truth to himself. There was something residual in the air here. Not malicious, but unresolved. Something that couldn't leave. The next night, he set up his phone in the den, recording audio while they slept. When he played it back in the morning, between the hum of the fridge and the distant chirp of the sprinklers, a man's voice whispered faintly, "Stay quiet. They're listening." He deleted the file immediately but never told Claire. Ethan didn't tell Claire about the voice. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because he couldn't explain it without sounding like he was unraveling. Instead, he went about his morning routine in silence, coffee, laptop, the faint creak of the old oak table, pretending not to notice that the house seemed to hum faintly beneath everything. It wasn't a sound exactly, more a vibration, a low, constant tension in the air, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. That night, the air conditioning shut off on its own. The house fell into a thick stillness, heavy enough that even the ticking of the hallway clock felt intrusive. Claire was asleep upstairs, her breathing soft and even. Ethan wandered into the living room, barefoot, the marble cool beneath his feet. The moonlight coming through the tall glass windows painted the room in sharp, silver lines. making the furniture look almost like a museum display. He stood there for a long time, staring at the piano by the far wall, a glossy black Baldwin that had come with the house. They'd never used it, but every so often, he swore he heard a single note ring faintly when no one was near it. He sat on the piano bench, his reflection staring back from the lacquered surface. A layer of dust lay over the keys except for one, the E above middle C. Clean, as if someone had pressed it recently. He brushed his fingers over it and felt a sudden chill, not from the air but from the material itself, a faint tremor that traveled up his arm. He pulled back quickly, almost laughing at himself. But the laughter died when he saw his reflection shift for a split second, the faint outline of another figure behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, a silhouette that didn't move. He turned around instantly. Nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching toward the kitchen, silent and still. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed downstairs until the first light crept through the windows, trying to rationalize everything: the voice on the recording, the piano, the unlocked doors. By morning, it all felt distant, like a strange dream. But when Claire came down, holding her phone, she looked pale. "Did you go into the dressing room last night?" she asked. "No." "Why?" She turned the screen toward him. The home security app showed a motion alert at 3:12 a.m., a soft outline moving inside the dressing room, faint but distinct, human-shaped. The timestamp matched the exact minute he had been staring at the piano. That was when they called in a professional, not a ghost hunter, but a sound engineer named Ryan Latham, a friend of Ethan's who specialized in restoring vintage audio. Ryan arrived with microphones, sensors, and a calm skepticism. He listened as Ethan described the voice, the intercom music, the strange hum in the walls. "Could be residual electromagnetic noise," he said. "Older houses sometimes carry echoes from buried wiring, especially if someone used studio equipment here." For 3 nights, Ryan recorded. He left small omnidirectional mics in corners of the living room, the hall, the hidden listening room. On the 4th morning, he came back with his laptop, set it on the kitchen counter, and played the results. Most of it was static, faint creaks, and the whisper of distant traffic. But then came the section from around 2:40 a.m. right before the usual flicker in the security system. Through the static, a deep male voice, smooth and deliberate, said, "The camera's wrong. The light's too cold." Ryan froze. That's not a glitch. That's speech." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You think it's a recording? Maybe something left on a loop?" "No," Ryan said softly. "This is live mic input. The voice is reacting to ambient sound. It's present." For days after, Ethan avoided the listening room. Claire tried to distract herself with work, filling the house with bright fabrics and warm lights, trying to erase the sterile stillness. But nothing seemed to stick. Every evening, when the sun dipped and the blue hour began, the shadows in the house grew dense, not dark, exactly, but layered, as if the walls remembered their own depth. Once, while rearranging old furniture in the upstairs hall, Claire caught a whiff of something strange, a faint trace of cologne, sharp and vintage, like something out of a 1960s dressing room. She followed it to the guest suite, which they never used. The smell grew stronger there, and on the dresser, she found a single cufflink, gold, with the initials RH engraved so finely she almost missed them. That night she didn't mention it to Ethan. She just placed the cufflink back where she found it and quietly closed the door. But later, as they were getting ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and for the briefest instant, behind her shoulder, a man stood in the doorway, smiling faintly, elegant, formal, watching. When she turned, the doorway was empty. The smell of cologne lingered for hours. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The next morning, Claire woke before dawn. The house felt unusually still, as if it were holding its breath. The light outside was pale and diffused through the marine fog that rolled down from Coldwater Canyon, softening the sharp outlines of the palm trees beyond the windows. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening. Somewhere deep in the house, She thought she heard the faint hum of the intercom again, that same low frequency that seemed to crawl through the walls like static electricity. But this time there was no music, just a pulse, a soft rhythm like breathing. She pulled on a robe and went downstairs, the wooden steps sighing beneath her weight. The house always seemed larger at that hour, its long hallways stretching farther, the rooms echoing more than they should. When she reached the den, she saw something strange. The sliding glass door leading to the terrace was open, the sheer curtains drifting lazily in the morning breeze. The alarm panel by the kitchen glowed green, no breach recorded. She closed the door quietly, her reflection ghosting across the glass. For a second, she could have sworn she saw another face there, slightly behind her own. When Ethan came down, she didn't mention it. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. They sat together in the breakfast nook, drinking coffee that had already gone lukewarm. "Ryan wants to come back tonight," he said finally. "He's bringing thermal gear. He thinks it's something to do with electromagnetic temperature shifts." Claire forced a small smile. "You mean he thinks the ghost is cold?" Ethan looked up from his mug, half smiling. "Something like that." By afternoon, the house was filled again with movement. Ryan setting up sensors, tripods, heat detectors. He ran long cables along the baseboards, muttering to himself about conductivity. Claire wandered restlessly from room to room, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by a person, but by the house itself. When dusk came, the colors in the living room shifted. The sunlight faded to a silvery gray, the exact tone of the walls, until it was impossible to tell where the architecture ended and the air began. Ryan sat at his laptop, watching the data feed, while Ethan and Claire sat across the room in uneasy silence. At 8:17 p.m., one of the microphones in the hidden listening room picked up movement. A soft scrape, then another. Ryan frowned. "There's something in there," he said, standing up. The three of them walked down the narrow corridor that led behind the library. The air grew colder as they approached. When Ryan pushed the door open, the room was dark except for a faint orange glow from the tape deck light, the same one Ethan swore he'd unplugged weeks ago. The reels were spinning slowly, as if something invisible was threading time itself through them. "Is it recording?" Claire whispered. Ryan leaned in, eyes wide. "No, it's playing back." He turned a dial and the speakers crackled. Then, through the static, came a voice calm, measured, unmistakably from another era. "Cut. That's too long of a pause. Let's take it again from the top." Another male voice answered, faint but clear, "Yes, Rock. Sorry, I lost my line." Claire covered her mouth. Ethan stared at the deck, frozen. Ryan quickly pulled the plug from the wall. The reels stopped, but for a moment after the power was cut. The voice continued quieter now, like a whisper beneath water. "The light's too cold. The house is tired." They left the room without speaking. That night, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. The moonlight traced pale shapes across the plaster. Around 3 a.m., he felt the temperature in the room drop sharply. The air turned heavy, almost metallic. He turned his head toward the window and froze. There, in the reflection of the glass, stood a man in a dark tailored suit, hands in his pockets, gazing down at him with a faint, almost melancholic smile. Ethan sat up abruptly, heart pounding, but the space beside the bed was empty. Only the smell of old cologne remained, faint and hauntingly familiar. He didn't tell Claire what he saw. He just walked outside, barefoot on the cold stone patio, and looked back at the house. From the yard, its large glass facade looked hollow, almost stage-like, a perfect set built for someone else's life. He could see his own reflection faintly in the window, but behind it, another shape stood just barely visible in the glow of the garden lights. The next morning, Claire found him sitting at the kitchen table, still in his clothes from the night before, staring at an old black and white photo he'd pulled from a library archive online. It showed Rock Hudson standing in the very same living room, same angle, same piano, same polished floor. "Look," Ethan said quietly, pointing to the far left of the frame. There, in the reflection of the Baldwin piano, was another man, faceless, blurred, watching from behind. The house had been mirroring itself for decades. Ethan didn't remember falling asleep that morning. When he finally opened his eyes, the sunlight had already stretched across the kitchen floor, cutting through the tall glass panes like pale knives. The house was silent again, but not the kind of silence that comforts. It was the brittle quiet of something waiting to be acknowledged. Claire was gone. Her coffee cup sat half-finished beside his, a faint ring marking where the steam had condensed. On the counter lay the cufflink RH, the same one she had found days before. Except now it wasn't alone. A second one sat beside it, identical, polished to a mirror sheen. He stared at them for a long time, the gold catching the light in thin flashes. He called her name softly. No answer. The sound of his own voice seemed to dissolve into the walls. The air in the house had that odd, metallic chill again. Every step he took echoed just slightly out of sync, like the sound was being reflected from another version of the room. He found her upstairs in the master bedroom, sitting at the vanity. The light was off, but the mirror reflected the morning sun, bright and harsh. She didn't turn when he entered. "He used to sit right here," she said quietly. "Before premieres, before interviews. This was his favorite spot." Ethan swallowed hard. "Claire? Who told you that?" "I didn't need anyone to tell me." She lifted her eyes to the mirror, and he saw her expression there before seeing it on her face, distant, entranced, like she was listening to something he couldn't hear. "He told me himself." He moved toward her, and the moment his hand touched her shoulder, the mirror flickered, not shattered, not cracked, but shifted. For one breathless instant, the reflection didn't show them at all. It showed the room as it was decades ago: cigarette smoke, a record spinning, Rock Hudson himself standing behind the vanity, looking into that same glass. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Claire gasped, breaking the trance, and stumbled to her feet. "We have to leave," she whispered. "Ethan, he doesn't want us here." But Ethan shook his head, still staring at the mirror. "No, I think he's trying to finish something." That evening, Ryan returned one last time, uneasy but curious. He'd been reviewing the audio from his last session and discovered that the voice had changed over the nights from directing lines to something more personal. "It's not playback," he said. "It's intelligent. It responds." They gathered in the den. Ryan set the recorder on the coffee table. The house outside was cloaked in fog, the garden lights dim, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and faint tobacco. When he pressed record, nothing happened at first, only the soft hum of electricity. Then, slowly, a voice began to form. "They built the walls too close," it murmured. "It keeps the light from breathing." Ethan leaned forward. "Who's speaking?" A long pause. Then, clearly, "You hear me now?" The room's temperature dropped several degrees. The sound system in the corner flickered on by itself, playing a faint orchestral theme from the 1950s strings, slow and mournful. The Baldwin piano responded with a single note, struck by no visible hand. Claire pressed herself against Ethan's side, whispering, "Please turn it off." Ryan reached for the plug, but the moment he did, the lights surged, every bulb in the house flashing white, blinding, until the circuit tripped. Darkness swallowed everything. For a few seconds, there was only the faint hum of the tape reels turning. Then the power returned, and the house looked exactly as before. Except now, the mirror across the room was fogged over from the inside, and in that fog, a handprint slowly appeared, large, distinct, resting against the glass. That was the last night any of them stayed there. 2 weeks later, the Donahues moved out. Ryan sent them a final message. He digitized the tapes and noticed something peculiar. When he enhanced the background noise, he discovered faint snippets of conversation, dated by the sound of cameras and the cadence of 1960s film direction. In one fragment, a voice matching Hudson's could be heard saying, "We'll keep shooting until it feels alive." But beneath that, buried almost imperceptibly, came a whisper that didn't belong to the recording at all. It was recent, softer, and carried the breath of a man speaking directly into the microphone. "It's alive now." The house sat empty again after that. Realtors stopped holding showings after one couple, reported that the power cut out the moment they tried to turn on the lights in the living room. The city listed it as available but unoccupied, though a gardener still tended the grounds every Thursday morning. He said sometimes, while trimming the hedges, he heard music playing faintly from inside, big band songs drifting from nowhere, a man's baritone humming softly along. And on still nights, neighbors swore they could see him on the balcony, tall, immaculate in a suit, watching over the city below, as if the scene was still rolling and the director had never called cut. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.